So thank you all for tuning in today for Drawdown Ignite webinar, Hidden Voices, Why Inclusive Storytelling is Critical to Climate Solutions. My name is Drew Arrieta. I'm the storytelling coordinator at Project Drawdown. We're a US-based nonprofit committed to helping the world reach drawdown as quickly, safely, and equitably as possible. We are going to make sure we have some team members backstage helping make sure today runs as smoothly as possible. And as folks are settling in, I see folks are just dropping into the chat where you're watching from. We're super excited that we have such a global audience today to talk about such an important aspect of Project Drawdown's work. Before we kick it off, I just want to go through a few housekeeping logistics. Everything in the chat right now, as you probably can tell if you've interacted with already, will come directly to me to limit distractions during the webinar. We plan to have a period of time at the end to answer questions at the end of the webinar. So please send us your questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom. We're going to try to answer as many questions as possible in the limited time we have. If you see your question may have been dismissed, we're really trying to pull as many of these questions together to answer them in the period of time that we have. Lastly, actually two more things. Please feel free to use the closed captions feature if it will enhance your experience. And we'd love to see and hear and view about how this webinar is resonating with you. So feel free to drop some hearts, some claps during the presentation. We want to know how it's resonating with you. All right, gonna give it a second before we kick it off. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Matt Scott. As the Director of Storytelling and Engagement, Matt Scott focuses on passing the mic to those who often go unheard in the climate space. Inspired by human-centered design, Matt shapes and implements Project Drawdown strategy for climate solutions, storytelling, and collaborates with team members of the organization's impact storytelling approach. Previously, he's worked as a global community director and storyteller of the world's largest global hackathon, NASA's International Space Apps Challenge, engaging over 100,000 people in over 150 countries. He also has worked with the Australian government, pivotal ventures by Melinda Gates, USAID, the United Nations, Nike, Walmart, and the Obama White House. The list goes on. It is my privilege and honor and to work with him and to learn from him. Without further ado, take it away, Matt Scott.
Thank you so much, Drew. Isn't Drew phenomenal? It's just great to work with Drew on this very small team, small but mighty team at Project Drawdown, working to pass the mic to voices that often go unheard. And I just want to thank you all for being here, whether you're tuning in live or whether you are watching the recording. It just means so much. Every single person who's part of this is not only a viewer or an observer, but each of you plays a critical role in passing the mic, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. So what I'm going to go through today is really a few key things. Why stories matter when it comes to climate solutions in a world where often we think of the emissions, the data, the science as being the thing that matters. Stories do matter, and I'm going to get into why and why inclusive stories matter in particular. I'll talk about the gaps when it comes to inclusive storytelling on the path to reaching drawdown, some learnings and themes from our work with the Drawdown Stories program, and I think maybe most relevant to all of you, how you can help pass the mic. Again, each and every one of you has a role, and as we go along, I want you to think about how you could leverage your own sphere of influence to pass the mic to voices that often go unheard. But first and foremost, I want to ask you to consider a question, and feel free to drop this response in the chat if you'd like to. What comes to mind when you think of stories? In a word, in a few words, feel free to drop that in. I'm excited to take a look at those more later. But it might be a person, it might be a moment, it might be an experience. One reason I ask this question, though, is because different things come to mind when we think of stories. For me, what comes to mind when I think of stories is actually this photo of me as a kid, not too long ago, with my dad reading me a book as I grew up. And I, like most kids and most people, resonated with stories. Stories are something that's human, something that we connect with, and that was me as a kid. One of the stories that I love, and some of you might recognize these folks, is the story of Captain Planet and the Planeteers. Like most kids, I gravitate to animated stories, and this one in particular was something that jumped out to me because of the diversity of characters and the diversity of powers that each of them brought to the table to make an impact. But as I grew up and as I began to just live my life and imagine what that would look like, the story that really gravitates me is the story of my dad, who became a hero for me in the place of Captain Planet and the Planeteers and so many other fictional characters. My dad grew up in a time in Prince Edward County, Virginia, during the Civil Rights era. And for those who don't know, his story, which ties into why I think of stories and why I know storytelling is important, is one that's often overlooked. As you could see in this picture, this is a sign of a bunch of students, of young people protesting the closing of the schools in Prince Edward County. This is part of history that's not widely known or widely covered in the US or otherwise, especially in a world where we're starting to see pushback against talk of race and identity. This is a story that is often overlooked. But in Prince Edward County, Virginia, in the face of the need to integrate, to bring together the students who had Black, less well-resourced schools and students from white schools that had better resources, the Virginia government closed the schools in Prince Edward County. And not just for a day or for a week or for a month, but for 5 whole years, they closed the schools in Prince Edward County. And so many students, including the students, real people pictured here, did not have access to education for 5 years, which is insane. Think about the pandemic itself and how detrimental virtual learning was for so many students. But the fact that these students didn't have access to any education, any public education for 5 years, is something that they could never take back. My dad's story, though, was one that's a little bit different. And you could see him in the top left of this picture in the light-colored suit, where he was one of a few lucky students who got to move away from Prince Edward County, live with strangers, with white families in a time where, as you could imagine, as a young Black man, the Civil Rights era was incredibly difficult for him. But he was able to go on to graduate college, to graduate business school, meet my mom through business school, have a family. You could see me in the bottom right in that in that orange shirt. I look exactly the same. And of course, he started his own business. Here's me with him growing up, and did so much to make his community a better place. And that's why when my dad ultimately passed away in 2017 due to a rare form of leukemia, I realized that story, his story, and so many other stories like his weren't being told. They weren't being covered. They weren't being heard, because far too often we overlook the stories and the voices of people of color, of Indigenous people, of Black people, of other underrepresented communities. And that's why I started to do the work that I do at Project Drawdown now with storytelling, to pass the mic to voices that often go unheard and that often aren't in the conversation. When we overlook stories of underrepresented communities, what we're overlooking is not only inspiration and something that feels good and something that represents someone, but what we're overlooking is the insight and impact, the information that that person and that those stories have to contribute. And because so often we're overlooking the stories of underrepresented communities in the climate conversation, we are missing out on the insights, the impact, even the inspiration, and I think most of all, like the solutions that come from so many other folks who are not actively at the table. And so in the work that we do at Project Drawdown, which is a global nonprofit climate solutions resource, we focus on climate solutions. And for years, since the launch of the 2017 book Drawdown, we have been talking about climate solutions in the world. But of course, when it comes to climate solutions, we're not all thinking the same thing. When this question, what comes to mind when you think of climate change, was asked to 14,000 people in a survey just a few years back, 44% of people responded with outcomes when it comes to climate change. 18% respond with causes, but only 3% responded with solutions. And the challenge with that, or the problem with that, is that we need people to see that solutions are possible because we need to bring solutions to life. One of the phrases that I find myself saying oftentimes is that you can't be what you can't see, which again points to the importance of stories, the importance of helping people see something that goes beyond images like this, the images of doom and gloom and the worst that could happen. Images like this of polar bears. Believe it or not, recent studies have pointed to the fact that often when people are asked about climate change, polar bears are one of the most common things that come up. Polar bears, and not people like you and me and our community members and those who are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate, who are already experiencing the detrimental impacts of it. It's images of folks like Al Gore, traditional leaders, and it's images of scientists. And of course, not all of us are scientists. I'm not a scientist traditionally. I know many of the folks who are watching this right now are not. But you can imagine that this isn't only a conversation for scientists alone, as critical and important as the science is to the conversation. There are also images of young people. I think of Greta as a great example of this, but again, not all of us could relate to spaces like this. Not all of us could see ourselves being at climate action summits with people in suits and speaking up. This is just not, these aren't the images that we all relate to. And so one of the things that I think is so critical is that each of us has a story when it comes to climate. I think, oftentimes I ask the question of who or what got you engaged in climate change and climate solutions. You could think about that for a second too, because I'm imagining that you're someone who is engaged or interested in climate change and climate solutions. And one reason I often ask that question is because everyone has a different story, everyone has a different entry point, and we really need to tap into that in order to get others on board and to move solutions forward. When it comes to the ways that we currently communicate about climate change, climate news, unfortunately, isn't the most effective when it comes to pushing solutions forward and motivating people to move in the right direction, to take action in the ways that we need people to take action. You'll see this diagram, which is based on research from psychologist and economist Per Espen-Stoknes, who talks about climate news and a focus on the crisis, on the science and the data alone. And when we throw that type of news and communication at people, it could often lead to a sense of distance, whether a sense of distance in terms of time, like I don't need to worry about this now, a sense of distance in terms of place, if you're not seeing the effects of climate, as far as you could tell right in front of you each and every day, or even a sense of distance when it comes to species, like I said, with polar bears. It's also really unfortunate that the ways that we communicate currently lead to a sense of doom or hopelessness, powerlessness. They lead to a sense of cognitive dissonance with the ways that we currently live being challenged by the information we have about ways that we should live based on what scientists and practitioners in climate are telling us. There's a sense of climate denial and even identity conflicts pop up when it comes to politics. And these things lead to us not seeing ourselves, not taking action, not doing what we need to do to help the world reach drawdown, that future point in time when greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stop climbing and start to steadily decline. All of these things pop up with the ways that we communicate, but stories play a critical role in moving people in the ways that we need them to move when it comes to climate solutions and climate action. And it's not only stories in general, but stories that are simple and relatable and digestible for folks and that feature simple actions. Stories that are social and feature characters that we could relate to and characters people that we resonate with, that we see ourselves in. Seeing characters that we see ourselves in or seeing people we see ourselves in helps us find belonging and see, oh, if that person could do it, I could do it too. Or if that person's doing it, maybe I should consider what I can do too. It's stories that signal progress when it comes to emissions, and stories that are backed by the science and the data, backed by facts, especially in a world where stories could be manipulated at times. But it's also stories that show how we're supporting other aspects of society. So, improving health, creating jobs, improving equity, safety, security, all these things are really critical in the stories we tell, because they motivate people to not only feel connected and find belonging, but also to see that the work that we do, not just on an individual level, but systemically matters when it comes to solutions. And so within the Drawdown Stories program at Project Drawdown, we really focus on telling stories that people could connect with and telling stories that fill gaps in the narrative on climate solutions. Stories that feature, new voices, new narratives, new messengers that have often been overlooked by the climate and climate solutions conversation. And so the key initiative that we have, or the signature initiative that we have through the Drawdown Stories program, is Drawdown's Neighborhood, a climate solution short documentary series passing the mic to voices that often go unheard, and available at drawdown.org/neighborhood. And to date, I've been really thankful and privileged, and our team's been really thankful and privileged to feature 37 folks in episodes published to date, which you could check out at drawdown.org/neighborhood and share, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, from Atlanta, Georgia, from the Twin Cities in Minnesota, from New Orleans, Louisiana. And as I go along, I look forward to telling you a little bit more about the stories that are coming up next. But I think the thing that's so critical when it comes to inclusive storytelling that's really represented in Drawdown's Neighborhood is that oftentimes the ways that we communicate, or the ways that climate news traditionally is communicated about climate, might tell only part of the story. For instance, here's an image that might look familiar to some folks of a flooded New Orleans in Hurricane Katrina. And here's another image of a flood New Orleans in Hurricane Katrina, featuring people, and frankly, people at their worst, people not only under the threat of climate, but experiencing the impacts of climate, which doesn't tell the full story. This doesn't tell the human story, the human perspectives of people. Instead, it features their trauma and the challenges they're facing, and not the ways that they, and really that we all, can be resilient in the face of disaster, in the face of the threat of climate change. It's images like this that highlight the narrative of victimhood as opposed to the narrative of solutions and us tapping into our real world superpowers to make a difference. And this is also the type of narrative that we with Drawdown's Neighborhood work to combat and to show a different side of, not ignoring the problems at all, but showing that solutions are possible, that they're within reach, and that there are real everyday people working on those solutions. And so now I am thrilled to show you the trailer from Drawdown's Neighborhood New Orleans, which tells a different story, that tells a story of people taking action. Let's take a look.
I'm Tynice Williams.
My name is Travis Banks.
My name is Ashley Thompson.
I'm Josh Benitez.
My name is Jonshell Johnson.
My name is Willie Jones III.
My name is Melody Arcia.
My name is Shelly Stiez.
And I'm helping the world reach Drawdown.
I am helping the world reach Drawdown.
I'm helping the world reach Drawdown by building a resilient future,
By bringing power to those without power.
by encouraging young leaders through the meaningful work of growing food,
By planting trees in New Orleans.
Through restoration, exposure, and awareness.
I love to show that and share that with folks because it's a reminder for me that there are real everyday people who are in the conversation, who are often not brought into the conversation. And one thing that's so interesting about this trailer is it talks about the work that people are doing to help the world reach drawdown. So it's not just about their individual actions and work. More than anything, it's about how they can get their communities on board and move communities in the right direction toward solutions. I think what's also so powerful is that it expands the idea of who solutions are for and who could, help the world reach drawdown, who could tap into their real world climate powers to make a difference. I also think that when it comes to these stories, one thing that we lean into is recognizing that it's not just about the inspiration and making us feel good to move in the ways that we need to when it comes to solutions. But it's also powerful to note that stories have power. And first and foremost, I want to point to the fact that stories have the ability to build power when it comes to reaching drawdown. One question that comes to mind for me and for folks who I talk with often is, how can we center the voices that often go unheard? And I think the first step of that is understanding who those voices are that are often overlooked in the conversation. One person who's featured in our Drawdowns Neighborhood series, who Drew and I have the pleasure of collaborating with, Josna Harris of Change Narrative, really represents this idea of building power in her story. And I would encourage you to check out her episode at drawdown.org/neighborhood. But Josna talks about who and why it's so important that we pass the mic to voices that often go unheard. Let's take a look.
The stories from frontline communities, I feel, that are the essential testimonies that we don't often hear, but that can really guide us in the just solutions that we're seeking.
It's so quick and brief what Joseph says, and so simple, but powerful, unloaded, that it is those stories of frontline communities that are often overlooked and that are essential to bring solutions to life. Yes, the climate science is critical. Yes, the data and the information that Project Drawdown has specialized in for years is critical, but we also need to bring others to the table when it comes to moving solutions forward, especially the voices in the communities that are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate that are not often in those conversations. It's when we're telling those stories that bring in those voices that we are also shaping culture, another lever when it comes to moving solutions forward. One thing that I think we all might think to ourselves or ask is, how can we know what's possible? How can we know it's possible to reach drawdown? How can we know it's possible for me or for you or for any of us to move solutions forward? And this often makes me think of Clara Katango of Tree Pittsburgh, who embodies this idea of shaping culture. That's the power that stories have, but also that providing representation and role models has. Clara actually grew up in Uganda and was someone who grew up afraid of forests, believe it or not, which is a little surprising for someone who works with trees day in and day out today. But from Clara's story in Drawdown's Neighborhood, what she talks about is that Wangari Maathai, the first African woman to win the Nobel Prize, and actually an African woman who not only won the Nobel Prize, but worked with trees in Pittsburgh. It was that example of Wangari Maathai that helped Clara see herself and find that she also could make a difference when it comes to trees in Pittsburgh and overall. And Clara's story is one that reminds me of the importance of, going to our roots, going to figure out what it is that motivates us, what it is that inspires us, and who it is that inspires us to make a difference. One thing that I'll share with all of you now from Clara that speaks so much to the importance of our stories, that speaks so much to the importance of really looking to our deeper why and our deeper motivation is this beautiful song that Clara performs and actually performed in our interview with Drawdown's Neighborhood. And here it is for you to take a listen to.
For so long the people have been pressed down. The system got me wonder where to break down. sun up to sundown, working for my ransom, trying not to feel like I'm let down, but moving forward as I sway to the beat and finding my position as I prepare the heat, swaying to the rhythm, feeling how I flow. I hold leap of concrete waves I swim through, so it's straight to the roots I go. Mine's elevated, it's love related, and it's straight to the roots I go.
I love to share that with folks, not only because of Clara's beautiful voice and singing, but because it's a reminder that there isn't just one way that climate stories and that climate problem solvers, climate heroes look like, come from, what they're motivated by. There are so many different perspectives. Like, I wouldn't have known before these Drawdowns neighborhood stories and the folks that we featured that I would meet someone like Clara, who's a musician and an educator and someone who's working with trees and tree plantations on degraded lands, one of the climate solutions of that Project Drawdown's identified. I wouldn't have known that. And yet it's so important that we have someone like Claire, because just like Wangari Maathai's story resonated with her, her story, her way of communicating, her voice resonated. We need a diversity of voices, of approaches to get a diversity of people on board. And that's one thing that Clara provides a reminder of. And that's really critical because it's that type of storytelling, that type of communication that has the power to change behavior and move us in the direction of drawdown, to accelerate the shift toward drawdown. How can we unlock everyday climate superpowers? To me, is a powerful question at the core of the work that we do on Drawdown Stories. And the simple answer is through representation, through stories that connect with folks, which reminds me of Robin Okinawa of the Captain Planet Foundation, who I was thrilled to get to talk to as a lifelong Planeteer myself, and who reminds me very succinctly, and reminds all of us, of the power of representation, the power of stories you relate to connect with action, to connect with moving people in the direction that we need to take the action on solutions that we need. Here's what Robin had to say.
If representation didn't matter, we wouldn't talk about it. But because people have been so historically excluded from spaces, to see yourself in that space and know that you belong, that matters. Because never would I have thought that I could do the job that I wanted to do in a space that focused on Black people and climate. Now I get to do that, but with kids all over the world.
What's so powerful to me about Robin's example is that her seeing stories, seeing voices, seeing perspectives that relate to her are the reason that she's helping the world reach drawdown. And again, that ripple effect is so powerful that that one story, or those stories that have inspired Robin, have helped to work with thousands of people all over the world to get them to take action. And that's how we build a movement. So it might sound like stories are fluff, or that they're inspirational and that they feel good, which they do, but also at the same time, they have the power to fuel this ripple effect. And that's why all of these stories that we featured to date, all 37 stories from the 4 locations we featured to date, matter and connect with different folks in different ways. And it's stories like the story of Willie Jones III with Groundwork New Orleans. Willie, who has a story that I resonate with and so many folks resonate with. Willie is someone who went through a lot of hardship in his life growing up. And one of the things that he said in our interview and says in his Drawdowns neighborhood episode is that he felt like the systems in New Orleans growing up took away a lot of the potential of him. And yet, despite the challenges he's been through, despite the fact that he lost his father, despite the fact that he's been through a lot, he is motivated to pursue a future, and he still has hope for the future. So he's overcoming just the despair of life to keep pushing through, which is a powerful example that we all could learn from and be motivated by to keep taking action and keep helping reach drawdown. It's stories like Richard Tumashime of Energy Independent Solutions. And Richard is someone who inspires me in just the fact that he grew up, was raised and lived through the Rwandan genocide. So he saw probably something, hopefully something that's much worse than what any of us have to see or experience, with folks being killed in his local community. And yet what's so inspiring to me is that he continues to have such a huge smile on his face. Richard's someone who loves dancing, who loves to be a light for his community, to give back to the community in Rwanda and the community in Pittsburgh by bringing solutions as it relates to solar and distributed solar photovoltaics to life. It's stories like Tanya Hicks of Power Solutions. Tanya from Atlanta, who was the first Black woman and the first woman in her union to do the work that she's doing as an electrician. Tanya, who is someone who I can't recommend hearing from enough in her Drawdown's Neighborhood episode, just because there's so much inspiration, so many quotable things that she has to share, and also a voice that's often overlooked in the conversation. And so when I think about the stories that we've told today, you know, I really want to get into what's next. Why does it matter that we feature these stories? And what are we doing with all this? Where are we going? It's not enough just to feature stories, but that engagement around stories and continuing to find opportunities to integrate voices really matters. And so the first thing I'll share is that next up, we're releasing the Drawdown's Neighborhood Tri-State series, featuring folks from Newark, New Jersey, from New Haven, Connecticut, and from the Bronx, New York, in that tri-state area. And these will be coming out actually this fall, if you take a look. And we're featuring these 11 heroes. I'm so excited and thrilled for you to get to know them. There's Christian, Anthony, Bilal, Natalie, Alex, Doreen, Chandra, Sochi, Haley, Amanda, and Jennifer, who are just all phenomenal voices, bringing so much perspective to the conversation, each with their own background and each with the ability to help others find their place in solutions, whether in the tri-state area or far, far beyond. And I think what's powerful is we'll be launching the stories with an event coming up at Climate Week NYC. So you could stay tuned for more on that and to hear more of the ways that we're going to bring folks together and find opportunities for them to be celebrated and heard, which speaks to something that we're just working on, and I'm happy to share this now, is that we are building out something called the network around the Drawdown Stories and Drawdown's Neighborhood, really bringing people together, which, as you could see in this photo and in some of the photos that we have to share, is something that we've started to do to date. Project Drawdown, thankfully, has this, superpower of, talking with not just community members, everyday community members, but with people from a wide range of backgrounds, with city officials, with nonprofits, with people from academic backgrounds, people from media, so on and so forth. And one of the big things that we're really working to do is to bring folks together, but also pass the mic to the climate heroes that we feature, so that they can be heard and that their needs and opportunities can be centered and connected with those who could move those climate solutions and move the work that they're doing forward. Finally, I'll also point to the fact that in the coming months, we're going to launch something called the Global Solutions Diary. The Global Solutions Diary really being an opportunity where we can invite everyday people beyond the ones that we sit down with in the Drawdown's Neighborhood interviews and other storytelling work, but invite everyday people to share with us how they're taking climate action, how they're helping the world reach drawdown wherever they are. So that's something coming up, but an incredible opportunity for you, for your community, for your network to be one of the many partners or collaborators in spreading the word and having folks that probably including some of you, share how you're taking drawdown aligned action. That's so critical when it comes to featuring stories from all over the world. And I think what's important at this point is to recognize that we can't afford to gatekeep around the stories we tell. We can't afford to exist in silos. We can't afford to not use our platforms to pass the mic. Because we need to pass the mic to help other people find belonging, help other people see themselves, help other people see that they have a role in solutions. And so finally, before I get to questions from you all, I want to share how you can pass the mic to voices that often go unheard. And that keyword is you. That each and every one of you who's tuning in now, whether live, whether listening to the recording, can play a role in passing the mic. So for instance, if you're an educator or with an education organization, we have tons of resources with Project Drawdown. There are the solutions that Project Drawdown has to offer. The Drawdown Labs team, which focus on businesses, has the job function action guides, which help people understand how climate solutions could be part of the roles that each of us have. And of course, through Drawdown Stories and Drawdown's Neighborhood, we have resources to help you discover solutions and take action. So there are learning resources, action resources, discussion questions, which are great for educators to use, but also for education organizations to build capacity in your audiences to get on board. And so if you are an educator, I'd encourage you to check out the Drawdown website at drawdown.org. But also if you're with an education organization, you could reach out to us at stories@drawdown.org, whether you're interested in finding ways to have us present to you all about the work that we do, whether you're interested in being a partner when it comes to just connecting your educators with Drawdown resources. There's so much there, but again, educators are one of the most amazing groups when it comes to utilizing Drawdown resources to move solutions forward and get their students on board. I think stories, in fact, are a huge way of getting a diversity of students on board beyond just the science and the missions and the data, which could be intimidating for many of us, myself included. If you're a journalist or with a platform, well, I think passing the mic is something that is inherent and an opportunity that's right in front of you to cover stories, whether it's covering Drawdown Stories or covering some of the many incredible folks that we've had the opportunity to feature. Reach out to us at stories@drawdown.org if you want to find ways to share the story of the folks that we featured far and wide beyond who we've reached. I can't stress enough how critical it is for every person who has a platform and who has some kind of reach to use their superpower, that reach, to spread the word. If you are a network or have a platform of some other sort, so whether you're within media or whether you have a blog or a newsletter, the work that you could do to spread the word about Drawdown Stories and even share a link to Drawdown's Neighborhood or share some of the videos that resonate most with you is really critical. If you're from communities or a community leader, we're also really interested in hearing from you, not only about ways that Drawdown Stories like Drawdown's Neighborhood and others could be useful, but as we look ahead to the future, we would love to know from folks who are in communities where climate solutions are taking place, of where we should go next. We've featured stories everywhere from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to the Bronx, to Newark, New Jersey, to Atlanta, to New Orleans, and so on and so forth. But we want to hear from you, community leaders and connectors within communities, of who we should know about, where we should go next, not only for Drawdown's Neighborhood, but also when it comes to our Global Solutions Diary. If you're with a climate and environmental organization, you also have power to pass the mic, largely in connecting your own audiences with opportunities like the Global Solutions Diary and with opportunities to partner to share how they're helping reach Drawdown. Not all the story it comes to climate solutions need to come from Project Drawdown and Drawdown Stories. And one of the big things that we really want to do is help folks see that there are climate stories everywhere. We just need to give people permission to share those stories, to be heard, and in the process, create this ripple effect that could inspire someone else to make a difference. And finally, of course, Project Drawdown and our stories work, I can't stress this enough, is supported by the generous support of donors, by the generous support of those who give, and it really means a lot. If you are compelled to donate and support our storytelling work, you can go to drawdown.org/donate, or even get in touch at stories@drawdown.org. That's what enables us to be the team that we are, to do the work that we do, and to pass the mic to those that often go unheard in all of the places where we do our storytelling work. If there's anything I could really leave you with before I get to questions, it's that you can pass the mic. You have power to pass the mic beyond your own superhero journey, tapping into your own superpowers. You passing the mic has the ability to inspire so many others, to create a ripple effect, and to get folks who haven't often been invited to the dialogue or welcome to the dialogue to see themselves, to see ourselves in climate solutions. Climate solutions are an all hands on deck effort. And what we need is, we need stories. We need folks that help us all feel like we have permission to help the world reach drawdown. And so, as I turn to questions, I want you to consider, how will you pass the mic to those who often go unheard? And I'll turn back to Drew Arrieta with the questions.
Thank you, Matt, so much for that incredible presentation. We've gotten a lot of really great comments and reactions throughout it. So thank you for sharing everything and the importance of the work. So we have lots of questions flooding in. We're going to try to get to them, as many as possible, in our remaining time. I'm just going to sort of just jump into the first one. Someone agreed about the great points about the problems around climate news and why we need other stories. They were looking for recommendations about how to disseminate these stories broadly, especially as traditional mainstream media are not ready to do so.
Yeah, I think that that's really powerful. And one thing I always encourage folks to do, which I might have mentioned at the start of this webinar, but it's to really consider your sphere of influence. So yes, we need to move these massive platforms forward, but I also think that every step and every bit matters. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to the ripple effect. So if you look at who you're able to influence, whether it's your family members, your friends, your classroom, your community, your coworkers, like that effect matters, because you never know what folks will do and where that influence will lead. For instance, in my own story, I think of like the influence that a few people had on me to then go on to reach, tens of thousands of people, if not more, in the work that we do. And so I would just encourage folks to start with your platforms. Do you have folks that you could reach out to encourage to learn these stories and to encourage to share these stories? Do you have a blog? Do you have a newsletter? Could you reach out to, your friends or your book club over email, whatever the case might be? But each of us has a role. And I think that taking that role seriously and, doing something to spread the word goes such a long way. And I hope that everyone who's tuned in today will do something to spread the word and do their part to, start to pass the mic.
Awesome. Great points. Do you plan to make mini documentary stories about people in rural areas? We are in Southern Oregon and have a lot of rural issues.
Yes, that'd be phenomenal. And again, we are a small team, as Drew knows. And I think that that's where the support really comes in. There's so much potential when it comes to stories. And I think it's really amazing to meet people and hear from them, like, what, you do all of this as a small but mighty team. And again, that's where the donations make a difference, because while we really focus on amplifying the folks that we feature in the stories that we tell. I even just happen to have like this postcard of some of the folks on my desk that actually like links to some of their organizations. We also could use support so that we could keep amplifying, keep networking, keep creating opportunities for folks. And, we would love to expand more to rural areas. And I think the Global Solutions Diary is also a great opportunity for those stories to start to trickle in through folks with a smartphone or with video who could just begin to submit what they're doing when it comes to climate action. So that's a great question. Thanks, Drew.
Great. And the next question is sort of a bit very similar location based. Does the Drawdown neighborhood work only focus on the US? Do you think you'll be able to include stories from other places, or is the intended audience for the project focused in the US?
Yeah, so I think, so far, maybe this is a theme in what will come up, but there is a lot that we could really do when it comes to stories. I mean, it just drives me wild looking at all of the US or around the world, like thinking of the work that I did with NASA or with other programs, knowing how many people are moving solutions forward. It's there's so much potential and so much opportunity. And so right now we're focusing on, these different cities and locations through Drawdown's neighborhood. I think in part because you have these like large built-in audiences in these different places. So when you have stories from a place like New Orleans, for example, and then you're able to circulate those in New Orleans, those are stories that resonate. Sure, they resonate nationwide and worldwide based on the themes that they feature that are very universal, but they also really resonate with those audiences in that place. And so I would say in large part, it's made sense for us to feature those areas because of those built-in audiences. But again, with, those donations, with the support to do more and to reach more folks, like I want to, in a more dedicated way, go beyond the US. And the Global Solutions Diary is actually really our first big way of doing that, partnering with folks from organizations all over the world. And if you are someone, by the way, with an organization that has a community of climate problem solvers in the US, worldwide, in a country that's not the US, wherever it might be, feel free to reach out at stories@drawdown.org too, because that's just the start of us beginning to amplify voices and stories worldwide from people all over the place who are helping reach Drawdown.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do the stories have any accompanying activities, viewing guides for educators?
Yes, yes, they do. So with Drawdown's neighborhood, there is actually, and I might even pull it up for folks to show. And actually, you know what? I'm going to show this for folks because we're on a webinar and there are the visuals of all of this. But this is kind of where you could begin to see some of the different voices and stories featured. And if you go to any of the pages on Drawdown's neighborhood, so I'll click to John Shell, you could see not only the video itself, but each of the stories has discussion questions, learning resources, and action resources, which you could take a look at, learn from, follow through on. So we're really big on that engagement piece. And that's something that the resources from Drawdown's neighborhood help highlight for folks. And those have been developed in collaboration with Josna Harris of Change Narrative, who's really phenomenal moving those forward. But we're also, especially in the realm of partnerships, like also open to having really Drawdown aligned or otherwise helpful resources that people could engage with. It's not the end of the story or the end of the journey to watch a video, but it's really the beginning of that journey. And we hope that we could point you in the right direction, regardless of sort of what background or demographic you're coming from.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for sharing. This is a really great question around approach. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how communicators should seek an appropriate balance between honoring people's real life experiences, including trauma, with hope, optimism, resilience, etc. It's important to hold space for both and for the complexity and nuance of lived experiences. A second question, although sharing individual stories tend to connect more at a personal level, how to avoid the heroization of individuals, including placing them on pedestals and shine more of a spotlight on community collective efforts.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot there. And one of the things I would say is that it's critical that we feature stories that that people could connect with and relate to in different ways. So when I think of the stories of the folks that we feature through Drawdown's neighborhood, there's this example that kind of gives you a lens for viewing someone's story. But these are stories that have often gone unheard. And I think that one of the best things we could do, especially in a world where we often go to the same leaders and the same voices, is that we could show that a diversity of others have power, have perspective. And so the thing I love about Drawdown's neighborhood is that it shows not only that there's this diversity of people who are important and critical to making a difference in their local communities, but the thing I love is that each and every one of them points to the fact that their communities, their collaborators, their partners, their stakeholders, like they are critical to moving their work forward. And so it's not even just about them. And I think the fact that the people who are featured are who they are, they point to the fact that it's not them, that they can't do it alone, that it takes collaboration, that it takes inclusion, that it takes, listening to different community members. And so there's a lot that you could really learn from the stories of folks that often aren't featured. And that's one of the things I would point to. And Drew, I know I didn't answer fully the first part of your question. If you could remind me exactly what that was.
Of course, no problem. They were interested in sort of the approach about how communicators can seek an appropriate balance between honoring people's real life experiences, including the trauma, with hope, optimism, and resilience.
Yeah, I think so. For me, one thing that I would say is I'll give the example of Drawdown's neighborhood, New Orleans. Before filming those stories back in January, and we just released those last month, about a month ago at drawdown.org/neighborhood, I remember some folks asked me, what are you going to ask folks about the hurricanes, about the storms, about, the challenges with that? And my response, which speaks to this question, is that what we do is we give space, or I give space for people to share their stories and share their voices. So I think what that means is really asking questions that are not, leading questions or making assumptions, but like always starting out, and you'll see this in videos, asking people, who are you? And digging into that. And one thing that's great is that it's not just the work that's centered, but you hear people talking about being a mom, being, a griever, being someone who is passionate about dance and the arts, being someone who's a nerd in some kind of way when it comes to their interests. There are all these different things that people bring to the table. And we kind of just follow that thread to give them the space to talk more about that. But I think specifically when it comes to focusing on people's trauma, it's important to give people a comfortable space to share the challenges they've been through. But I love to ask about people's superpowers. I love to ask what gives people hope. I love to ask what rest looks like for people. And so asking questions that don't only assume that someone's a victim, but really more than anything, asking questions that lean into someone's superpowers and just their overall greatness is what I think is critical. It's important that we don't only assume because people are from communities that are the most most vulnerable to the impacts or the first and worst impacted, that we can't have joy, that we can't have that problem solvers attitude, and that we can't have superpowers. And so that's what I would say. And I'm happy to share more about that at some point if folks are interested in just learning more about our approach, because that's something we've heard a bit from even journalists and media as well.
Great. That's a really great, wonderful answer. The next couple of questions I'm still going to pull these together, but people are really interested in the approach in identifying folks that we find in these interviews, especially if you're not a part of those communities already. How do you find the underrepresented voices to promote, uplift?
Yeah, so Drew, I know you could absolutely speak to that work, but it really starts from a place of, number one, like going in with the intention of what we're doing and being very clear about what we're doing. We focus on passing the mic to voices that often go unheard, which has a few levels to it. Primarily, it means featuring folks from underrepresented communities, but it also means not just featuring folks from underrepresented communities, but folks who haven't necessarily been given the mic or haven't been featured or been interviewed or been covered, or even folks who don't think that they should be sharing their story because they haven't been validated in that way before. So we start with that intention and that focus, and of course also focus on folks who are working on moving forward drawdown aligned solutions in some kind of career that relates to that. But really, as you know, Drew, it's really a process of connecting with folks. And as we look ahead to 2024 and future series that we're filming for Drawdown's Neighborhood or other storytelling work, like, we love to hear from folks not only of where we should go, but we'd love to hear from folks who have connections within their cities and communities, who could say, oh, here are some of the people you should ask for recommendations. And what's really cool is that with each of the cities, we build this kind of vibrant network of city officials, of nonprofits, of academics, of folks from justice organizations, folks from a wide range of backgrounds who help us find the folks that we find. It's kind of like, I almost think of it like monkey bars sometimes, where you're like going from from person to person and recommendation to recommendation until we ultimately find the people that we feature.
Yeah, great. I think it's a very, just to add a little bit, it's a very slow process, and, really listening, not leaving it up to us to decide what story is worth sharing, but really listening to people in the community and building those relationships that they trust us to sort of share out the stories and highlight heroes in the community that haven't been heard,
Yeah, I'll also just add very quickly, so that we can get to the last couple of questions or so. But, we don't decide what story is worth telling. We don't know the story that's going to come out before doing the interview itself. And I think that that's the beauty of it. It's that we're not putting a quality filter on if this person's lived experience is worth showcasing. And if anything, I think that adds to the diversity of stories and the authenticity of stories that we're able to feature through Drawdown's Neighborhood, and I'm sure through other work that we do to come.
Awesome. I'm trying to squeeze in maybe 2 more last questions.
You could do it.
Where have you seen successes getting folks to engage with a story, not just scrolling past it on social media or watching for 5 seconds, but sort of really going into it in depth? Do you have any success stories or case studies of people using or watching our videos, and what has happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of broad, but one of the areas that's been really amazing is connecting with communities through talks and workshops, which is also something that folks could request, and you could either reach out using the speaker request format, drawdown.org on the contact page, or email us at stories@drawdown.org. But, it's been really cool to connect with so many different classrooms and community groups who will watch a story and then they'll have conversations about it. They will use that as a jumping off point for their projects working on different solutions. And so the list really goes on, but I think that the key point I want to make there is that, whether you're with a corporation or with a community group or an education institution, like again, the list goes on, you could utilize this story as a starting point when it comes to your climate solutions journey and help your communities find their climate solutions superpowers.
Awesome. We're unfortunately getting close to time. I want to thank everyone for all the questions that came in. That's a wide range, vibrant questions that we had the opportunity to ask. So I wanted to ask one last, what's one thing you want people to walk away with who attended or are watching this webinar?
If there's one thing that I want people to walk away with, it's that, you sharing matters. I like the main link. If there's one thing that I like very specifically that I would love for each and every person doing this to do, it's to go to drawdown.org/neighborhood. That's the main link for a lot of the resources we've shared. And to post that, to share it, to send that to people, send that in a text to 5 of your friends, email that to 5 people, post that on your Twitter, on your LinkedIn, on your threads, on your Instagram, spread the word. It matters. that you spread the word, because so often we sit on the sidelines and assume that these things kind of happen regardless of what we do. But if there's one thing I want folks to know, it's that, you know, this work is not possible without your support. This work is not possible without the donations that you have, that you could give, or the gifts you could give. This work isn't possible without you spreading the word. This work isn't possible without, you know, all this groundswell of support. And that makes all the difference in the world, especially in a world where we are seeing a lot of pushback against conversations on identity, on race, on who we are, even on climate. It takes all of us to pass the mic and move solutions forward and to reach Drawdown. And I'm so thankful for each and every one of you, truly, who is working to do that. And so if you are interested in partnering with some kind of way, bringing us in for a talk or workshop or something else that we could do to support your journey, feel free to reach out at stories@drawdown.org. And back to you, Drew. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone, for spending the last hour with us. It's been a privilege and a joy. Thank you, Matt, for sharing all your knowledge with us and your experiences. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to learn more about climate solutions today. As was shared in the chat, we'll be sending out a recording of today's webinar with more resources and answering some questions that we didn't get to in a couple of days. We look forward to seeing you at the next month's Drawdown's Ignite webinar. That's on August 23rd. Mark it on your calendar right now. Our phenomenal senior scientist, Kate Marvel, will be giving a presentation on a climate status report, where we are and where we're going. So August 23rd, same time next month, mark it on your calendar. Thank you, everyone, for your time again. It's been really special to spend this with you.
Thank you, everyone.